Welcome to the 13th Annual Near Hall of Fame Induction Banquet. Congratulations to the inductees of the class of 2010, and thank you all for coming today. This is a great turnout. I'd like to thank all the many people that worked so hard to make today a reality. One person in particular I'd like to thank is Rhonda Blanchett. Rhonda serves as our club treasurer. Rhonda serves as our club treasurer. She's also involved in the Membership and Identities Committee. Many of you know that her dad, Bob Seller, who's our vice president, has been in the hospital for the last several months with some fairly serious health issues. Rhonda's been balancing her commitments to family and to the club and has done a great job of handling the ticket sales and seating for today's banquet. So thank you very much, Rhonda. We'll be starting today's banquet with the awarding of the Jack Rada Memorial Media Award. And here to make that presentation is a member of the Near Hall of Fame, former Stafford and Waterford Media Coordinator, Mr. Pete Zanardi.
Well, this is a great gathering. And I'm convinced there is no sport that values photographers more than ours. That's probably because in the whole history of our sport, there's been so many changes. I mean, you look at a pre-war coupe, that's a far cry from one of Bob Garbarino's modifieds today. But we value both of them because it is that continuum that we find justification for being part of the overall sporting scene. Mary and Howie Hodge have been part of that continuum for some 3 decades. How many images? How many winning passes and victory lane shots? How many faces reflecting the glory of our sport, the sorrow and the great joy that's all part of it? They're going to last forever for the Hodges. What are there, hundreds of thousands? He's working today. They're skilled artisans, but they're much, much more. Let me tell you why these people are winning the Jack Rada Memorial Award. And let me tell you why it is an esteemed honor for me to present it today, as a writer and as a media guy, and as just a fan. Howie and Mary have never ever let me down. And I'm just one of the many who can say that. One of the many that continue to benefit from the willingness for these people to help, that willingness which is grounded not only in a love for their sport, but more important, for the people of our sport. Today, Howie, people are going to take your picture. Mary, people are going to take your picture. It is a singular honor to ask both of you to come up here and accept the Jack Rada Award.
I'm not very good at speaking, so I appreciate everything that Pete said, and it gets us thinking. We've had a lot of fun, met a lot of great people over the years. A lot of them are in this room right now tonight, this afternoon, and that's what's made it fun. You're all a bunch of good people, and we really enjoy what we do, and hopefully our pictures will help people remember and enjoy what we've photographed. Thank you. It really is a big honor for us to get this award. You know, thinking about what it means, it really is a big honor. Thanks.
I'll just add, as I usually do, if you say so.
By the way, Howie Hodge is one of the founders of NEAR. I forgot to say that, but Howie was there when this organization was founded. I think you can understand where it's come by looking around here today. Getting back to how much we value our photos, Dave Dykes has a website called Racing Through Time. And it's an example of how we truly, truly hold these images so dear in our sport. And David now is going to come up and make a presentation of the Veterans Committee. Thank you.
Hi folks, glad you could all be here. This is my first time as a presenter. I'm very happy to be here. And I think we're going to start with the late Chuck Arnold. A Stamford, Connecticut native, the late Chuck Arnold started racing modifieds in the late 40s, but soon turned his interests to midgets and sprint cars. Crowned the 1953 NASCAR Midget Champion, he also scored multiple victories with the Northeastern Midget Association, ARDC, USAC, and the USC Sprint Car Series. A veteran of the Indianapolis 500, he competed at the Brickyard in 1959. Passed away in 1997. Today, we welcome Chuck Arnold into the New England Auto Racing Hall of Fame. We continue with a gentleman by the name of Archie Blackadar. Another World War II veteran, the late Archie Blackadar became involved in the sport during the busy post-war era. He began his career as a starter at a number of Vermont tracks during a time when flags were waved from trackside rather than from the safer confines of a starter stand. Serving the sport in a number of roles, he was also involved in track ownership, but is perhaps most recalled as a NASCAR chief steward throughout New England and New York, a position he held for over 3 decades. He passed away in 1993. Today, we welcome to the New England Auto Racing Hall of Fame, Archie Blackadar. Archie Blackadar's wife, Pete, is going to say a few words here.
Just want everybody to know how much Archie loved all the racing people. They were his family. And his loyalty to racing surpassed his loyalty to what he promised me when he first knew me. He said if it came to a choice between racing or me, it would be racing. So I'm very happy for him today that this has come about. And he certainly was as loyal to racing as anybody could ever be. And I thank you all.
Lastly, we're going to talk about Marty Hardy. Hailing from New Hampshire, World War II veteran Marty Hardy's career as a car builder started in 1949. Success almost immediately at places like Hudson, West Peabody, Fitchburg, Brookline, and Catamount, with such notable races as Ernie Gahan, Leo Richard, Jimmy Travers, and Freddie Borden, naming just a few, all found success wheeling machines crafted by Hardy. A celebrated racing figure within the Northern Tier for many seasons, today Marty Hardy gains his spot in the New England Auto Racing Hall of Fame. As a bonus, we had a note from another Hall of Famer. He sent this note to us, and Dick Batchelder wanted this to be heard. Dick says, I have known Marty for a very long time. His enthusiasm for racing equals that of a big kid. He's out in his tool truck every day, always sharing a story at every stop. Although I could not be there in person today, I wanted to congratulate Marty and all of the 2010 inductees. Dick says he remains very honored to be an inductee himself. Today, we present Marty Hardy to the New England Auto Racing Hall of Fame.
But I can think of dozens of people who deserve it more than I do. Vic Angus, Bobby Gahan, Freddie Borden, Mike Whedon, and so on. But I'll take it. Auto racing has been a lot of fun for me. Of course, it helped that my good French-Canadian wife, Arlene, and our children put up with my shenanigans. Our boy Jerome raced locally with quite a bit of success, both as a driver and an owner. I built quite a few cars in those old days, but they were just good, solid little cars. We were down country one time in the pits with a new creation, and George Summers strolled by. He said, that's a mighty hardy car, so they might have had a little odd flair to them. If I have any real claim to fame, it's in setup for handling. I spent thousands of hours reading all the technical articles in Road and Trash and similar books and magazines, trying to separate the itty-bitty wheat from the tons of chaff. I also spent quite a bit of time jawing with other racing people. Finally, out of all this, Vic Kangas and I have come up with a system or method of setting up a race car. The essence of this can be scribbled out on one sheet of paper, but I think Lou Boyd or Carey would have a hell of a time selling a book with only one page. Thank you.
Next up is an award that is very dear to many of us who knew Danny Party very well. Presenting the Danny Party Memorial Award is a man that's been absolutely crucial to the success of the Hall of Fame here, Mr. Al Feeney.
Thanks, Dave. I'm sure many of you in this room knew Danny Party. He was a man blessed with strong passions and even stronger opinions. Fortunately for us, he shared those passions and opinions with NEAR. He was a charter member and did more for this club during the formative years than anyone will ever know. In 1997, when I first shared my ideas about creating the New England Auto Racers Hall of Fame, he immediately supported the idea and worked tirelessly for its success. He died suddenly in December of 2007, and the board of directors immediately voted to create a memorial award to honor his life and contributions to the Hall of Fame. The Danny Party Memorial Award is given annually to a member that exhibits the same passion and work ethic that Danny did. The previous recipients were Doug Farrell and Ari Sylvia. The honoree today exhibits the same passion and dedication as Danny, Doug, and Ari. He was not around at the beginning of the formative years, but when he joined, he immediately jumped in with both feet and hit the ground running. He served 3.5 years as president of NEAR and was the de facto chairman of the Hall of Fame during that time. He continued the objectives of the Hall of Fame and has helped grow it into the success it is today. Normally, Danny Party's widow, Marie, is here to help present the award, but unfortunately she called us and said that she came down with the flu, was unable to attend. So I asked Jackie Root, longtime compatriot, fellow of Stafford Springs, employee, or I don't know if they were employees, but they shared a lot of experiences. So Jackie's coming up to present the award to my friend, Pete Newsom.
Not only is Pete surprised, but obviously he's been very surprised. For those of you that have been around for so many years, you know, as Al said, the passion that Danny had for all of motorsports, but more particularly for us to protect our heritage and the legacy that is NEAR. And it gives me a great deal of pride to present to you, Pete, the annual Danny Party Memorial Award. Congratulations.
Oh man, I wish the gin would kick in. This is incredible. Oh man, I never saw this coming. Oh man, Danny meant so much to all of us sitting here. And he really touched me with his advice, helping me along when I became president. And Danny was a great guy. And I hope this award lasts forever. Danny's memory will last forever. I thank Danny. He's looking at us down here. He's watching over us today, and he's saying another great show. Thank you to everybody in there, and I got a lot of people to attack after this. You guys got me. Thank you very much.
I can't believe we caught Pete Newsom. I was surprised.
Now, if you're a person who can't remember what you just had for lunch, but you know in vivid detail who won the consolation race for the B main at Plainville Stadium, or who finished 18th in the in the June 14th feature at Thunder Road, this is your kind of banquet. We only have one rule tonight. Don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. So let's get those stories rolling. And to make the first presentation, I think the finest journalist there is in motorsports today. He has written books on some of the legends, the guys that go by their first name, like Eddie, Bugsy, Smoke. And not only has he been at every track, I think, in America, he's been to every watering hole, bar, and saloon within a 10-mile radius of every track in America. Mark Bones Boussier.
Just want to thank everybody for being here, and thanks for having me again. Every year, this is my favorite day of the year. I mean, all my heroes are right here, and just to get to break bread with all you people is an honor, so thanks. Jeff Bodine was already a veteran driver when he moved to New England in 1975. He was a young veteran, sure, but a veteran nonetheless. After all, in 1972, he had already won the Race of Champions at Trenton. But when he was hired to drive and maintain modifieds for Dick Armstrong's New Style team and relocated from Chemung, New York to Bellingham, Massachusetts, it was the start of something big. With that move, Bodine launched the portion of his career that led to every great thing he accomplished on the national stage. His time with us was actually quite short. He pretty much left this region by 1979, at least as a full-time resident. So we're dealing with 4 seasons, 1975, 76, 77, and 78. In the sweep of racing history, 4 years is the blink of an eye. Yet in that blink, Bodine flashed through New England like a comet, bright and spellbinding. No, we can't ignore his record in other areas. In upstate New York, he won at Shangri-La, Spencer, Oswego, Holland, Lancaster, Utica, Rome, and his home track in Chemung. On Long Island, he won at Freeport and Islip. Then there was Pocono, where Jeff won the 1978 Race of Champions on the 2.5-mile tri-oval, and Martinsville, where he won 7 modified events. In North Carolina, he won modified races at Hickory and North Wilkesboro. He also won at Kingsport, Tennessee, and of course many times at New Smyrna, Florida. Later in NASCAR's late model sportsman class, he won at Martinsville, Kingsport, and across Virginia at South Boston, Langley Field, and the Southside Speedway. Obviously, at the Cup level, Jeff was a 1982 Rookie of the Year. In 1984 at Martinsville, he scored the first victory for a young kid car owner named Rick Hendrick. It was also with Hendrick in 1986 that Jeff won NASCAR's marquee event, the Daytona 500. Later, he won multiple races for legendary owners Bud Moore and Junior Johnson. Among his 18 Cup victories were 4 with his own team. He also won the Sports All-Star race, known then as the Winston, with his own car. But since our concern today is New England, let's look at the time Jeff spent with us. Some of the wiser historians in this room, guys like R.A. Sylvia and Dave Dykes and Pete Zanardi, love to talk about eras. The coupe era, the big block era, Bobby Judkins' Pinto Revolution era, and so on. Well, when you talk about New England racing in the second half of the 70s, you're talking about the Jeff Bodine era. Before 1975, we hadn't seen much of him, but what we did see was impressive. I did some research, and I believe Jeff's first 2 appearances in New England came in 1970 as part of the old All-Star League. Check this out. On August 11th of that year, 1970, he finished 3rd at Vermont's Catamount Stadium on a night when the top 4 read as follows: Richie Evans, Bug Stevens, Jeff Bodine, Maynard Troyer. The very next night at Stafford, Jeff finished 4th behind winner Bugsy, runner-up Don Diffendorf, and 3rd place man Evans, but ahead of Steady Eddie Flemke, who finished 5th. So at the tender age of 21, Bodine was already running shoulder to shoulder with some real heavyweights. But once he paired with Armstrong, boy, did Jeff ever shake things up. In 1975, their first year together, they won the Stafford Track Championship, which was a huge deal. In that same period, some of the wildest racing took place at Thompson in those wonderful Sunday evening swab block shows that we all remember. We're talking Hall of Fame talent every week: Flemke, DeCero, Bouchard, Stevens, Cleary, Rosati, Harmon, Miller, just the list goes on. In September of 75, the first ever Thompson 300 packed the pits with more than 100 modifieds. At the end of that long day, in victory lane sat Bodine, Armstrong, and that #1 Pinto. The same combination won the event in 1976 and 78. Their team was nicknamed the Big Red Machine, and it turned out to be a steamroller. Again and again it rolled to victory at Seekonk, Waterford, Riverside Park, Westboro, Monadnock, Star, everywhere. Bodine was a two-time champion of the Yankee All-Star League, a wonderful series of Wednesday night small block shows. In fact, in 1978, Russ Conway will remember this, but Jeff won every one of the 6 Yankee All-Star shows, which is an incredible feat. Speaking of incredible and speaking of 1978, that was the year Bodine and Armstrong ran 84 modified features and won 55, the majority of them right here in New England. For most drivers, 55 victories is a damn fine career. For Jeff Bodine, in the era that he owned, it was merely the best of 4 outstanding seasons. By '79, that era was over. Riding enormous momentum, Jeff had gone south to drive late models and to chase his Cup Series dreams. But occasionally he'd still return for a big modified show, and he hadn't gotten rusty. Driving for Lee Allard, he won big at Trenton and Oswego. That same year, '79, teaming at the last minute with New Hampshire's Alan Whipple, Bodine won his 4th Thompson 300 in 5 years. In an '80 and '81, driving a part-time schedule for Billy Taylor in the White Tornado Pinto, Jeff won modified races from Connecticut to Florida. He also gave us New England folks a look at his fender skills by winning the 1980 and 1981 Oxford 250s. Of course, it wasn't all champagne and roses. There were controversial dust-ups with Bugsy at Stafford, Freddie DeCero at Seekonk, Kenny Bouchard at Stafford, Eddie Flemke at Thompson, and of course Richie Evans at Martinsville. But always, this shows Jeff was willing to mix it up with anybody, no matter how big the other guy's reputation was. A while ago we were talking and recalling those days, and he smiled and said, quote, "Some people liked me and some people booed me, but you know something? If you didn't have rivalries, the fans wouldn't care as much," unquote. He was right, because back then, whether they came dressed in Bodine red or in t-shirts supporting Bouchard, Bugsy, or whoever, the fans packed the grandstands, and that was one of New England racing's real golden ages. I've always found it a little bit troubling that some of those fans, and even some people in the pits, would downplay Jeff's success by saying things like, well, he always had great equipment. Of course he did. Dick Armstrong could afford to go racing in style, but Dick hired Bodine for the same reason Lenny Bowler hired Bugsy and Freddie, the same reason Bobby Judkins hired Eddie Flemke and Gene Burgeon, the same reason Bob Viteri and Vic Bombassi, going way back, hired Wild Bill Slater. That's because from day one in this sport, smart team owners have hired the best available drivers. From Armstrong to Bud Moore to Junior Johnson, a lot of owners decided Jeff was indeed that best available driver. Some, no doubt, will consider him the best they ever had. I'm glad I got to see him in his era. I'm thrilled that I got to watch that Comet as it streaked past us. And I'm honored to stand here as we welcome Jeff Bodine into the New England Auto Racing Hall of Fame. Unfortunately, Jeff isn't with us today, but he's got a hell of a good reason. If you don't know it, he's actually racing today in South Africa on a brand new 2.5-mile super speedway that was built down there. But I understand that he sent a DVR or DVD, whatever you guys call those things. He sent a video, and there he is.
Hi, this is Jeff Bodine. I want to thank everyone at NEAR for putting me into their Hall of Fame. I really appreciate it. It's a great honor. Of course, I remember racing up in New England, all the great races we had, Stafford Springs, Thompson, Seekonk, Westboro, Waterford, probably forgot a few, Malta, just all the tracks up there. They were great days, a lot of fun. Had a lot of nice race fans. Some of you guys cheered for me, some cheered against me. Of course, when you cheered against me, I call it boo power, and that just made me go faster. So I appreciate all that boo power you gave me back in those days. Of course, all the race drivers that I drove against, and I'm going to forget a whole bunch of you, but so don't get mad at me again. But Freddie DeSaro, Bugsy Stevens, Ronnie Bouchard, Maynard Troyer, Richard Evans, Jerry Cook, Leo Clary, George Summers. The list just goes on and on and on. All you guys that used to race against 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 times a week. Never forget those days. Of course, the car owners I drove for a few up there. Bob Garbarino drove his car a couple times. Of course, famous car, the #1 Big Red, we call it, owned by the late Dick and Carol Armstrong. You know, that's what really got me going in NASCAR. Got my name out there. Got me in the Guinness Book of World Records in 1978. I won 55 out of 84 starts. Great year, but we had a lot of great years up there. Big Red, boy, that was a lot of fun. Used to terrorize you guys, didn't I, with that car? But you know, that's how I learned how to drive, how to race. You know, and if I hadn't had those days with all you drivers and all the tracks, never would have made it in NASCAR. And of course, you know the rest of my story. Most of you do. Moved south. You know, I was waiting for that phone call up in New England, but from somebody down in North Carolina, but nobody ever called me, so I had to move down there to get somebody to call me and want me to drive their car. First full-time year was 1982 with Cliff Stewart. That really, got me going, and that was my career. Of course, I was Rick Hendrick's first driver. Won his first race for him, and now look at Hendrick Motorsports, Dynasty and Cup racing. Every time those cars go faster, win a race, I feel a part of it. Of course, none of those drivers have ever sent me a part of what they won, but that's supposed to be a joke. Of course, we won Daytona 500 with Rick in 1986. Levi Garrett, sponsor, late. Harry Hyde was my crew chief back in those days, and Gary Nelson was the crew chief when I won Daytona. Really, really special days. Driven for a lot of great car owners in Cup racing. First one, Cliff Stewart, Rick Hendrick, Junior Johnson, Bud Moore. Gee, I even drove for myself because I was the best car owner. They were great days. I wish I still had that number 17, but that's life. It leads you to different things. I drove for Joe Bessie. He's a New Englander. Had a couple of good years with Joe. But during that time, I had a little accident in Daytona in the first truck race they had down there. My son was supposed to be driving that truck that day, but they wanted me to, and I'm glad I was in it. We're going to win the race. I had a fast truck. But had a little accident. God blessed me that day, though. I'm still alive, still racing. I haven't retired, so any of you modified car owners up there might see this. If you needed a driver, just give me a call. Get a hold of me. I'm still driving. Actually, that's why I'm out right now. That's why I'm not in Connecticut at your banquet. I'm over in Pakisa Speedway in the Free State of South Africa. The first Free State 500 race in that country. It's a 1.5-mile racetrack, shaped and built after the Las Vegas Speedway. It's a 1.5-mile track. It's great. People over here are wonderful. If you've never been to South Africa, I recommend it. It's a beautiful country, beautiful people, and they do love auto racing. That's why we're here. I'm here with ASA, Dennis Huth. We used to work for NASCAR, bought ASA, and he made this arrangement with the country of South Africa to run this race. I think we're going to be here for the next 4 years, and hopefully longer. We're going to try to get a series going over here where they race every year and 3 or 4 races a year. But I'm hoping right now I'm in Victory Lane celebrating my win, and because we're about 7 hours ahead of you in Connecticut, so the race should be over. And here I am with the trophy, the checkered flag, and got my hat on, and hopefully I'm celebrating that first win. It wasn't easy today. No, it wasn't. Had a lot of great cars, a lot of great drivers over here, and but I'm sure glad I'm in Victory Lane. I want to thank all my sponsors, family and friends for putting this on. You know, like I said, I haven't retired, I haven't given up, haven't quit. I'm still racing, still active, and I wish I was up there with you now, celebrating and enjoying all of you up there. I do appreciate the Hall of Fame, and maybe next year I'll be able to get up there and see everybody in person. But thanks a lot, and hey, it's fun to win over here in South Africa. Yay!
A couple of quick things. I really do want to thank Jeff for doing that. I mean, a lot of times guys can't make it to an event, and they blow it off without any recognition whatsoever. But Jeff really wanted to be here and really wanted to send that. So, you know, he loves his days in New England, and we're glad we got to see him. Accepting his plaque today on Jeff's behalf is not only a guy who knew Jeff and Dick Armstrong and Carol Armstrong very well, but a guy who could really appreciate the Jeff Bodine era, because after all, excitement sold newspapers just like it sold tickets. And the guy in that era who had the feistiest trade paper around was Speedway Scene, published by a Hall of Famer and a great friend to all of us, Mr. Belliser.
Thank you. Well, I had a big speech here, but I think Bones and Bodine did enough. So all I'm going to do is accept his plaques and thank everybody. Okay.
Now, if you own a television set, you're well aware of our next presenter. For more than 25 years, he has elevated the art of pit reporting and sideline reporting in college football to a higher level. And it all started years ago at Playville Stadium. He went from selling ice cream in the stands to become a national name in the media, ABC, ESPN, and now Versus. And he is the only person in America to broadcast the three greatest races: the Daytona 500 at the Daytona International Speedway, the Indianapolis 500 at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and the Ferrara 100 at the Stafford Motor Speedway. Jack Arute.
Thanks, Pat. Actually, the Ferrara 100 was the most important race I ever broadcast. I know we were subjected to classic Jeffrey Bodine there for a minute, but I do want to share with you one Jeff Bodine story that I think some of you Hall of Famers may remember. On a Friday night at the Stafford Motor Speedway, the nightly drivers meeting where the late Franny Grote would stand there and say, all right, any questions? And from the back came a hand from a 6'5" semi-professional boxer by the name of Don Flynn. Yeah, I got a question. What's the fine in NASCAR for fighting? What do you mean there's a fine? I want to know how much it's cost for fighting. Franny looks it up and says, okay, section 1335-5. Any participant in a NASCAR event, either a crew member, driver, or owner, who engages in fisticuffs will be fined $100. This big, strapping former professional boxer climbed up the hill, peeled off a brand new $100 bill, gave it to Franny Grote, turned around and cold-cocked Jeff Bodine. Wait, there's more. He then turned back to Franny Grote, who was aghast, and said, here's another 100 just in case I'm so inclined later. It's kind of, there's a certain amount of symmetry to the fact that I will follow Jeffrey's induction, because the man that I am pleased to induct into the Hall of Fame played a critical role in what Bones told you was the golden era of modified racing. But it's not just modified racing that he had an abiding passion for. He had an abiding passion for anything that had four wheels. Frank Ferrara started his career like many of us. If it wasn't Plainville Stadium, it was Riverside Park, correct? In southern New England. Well, you saw on the sides of race cars, and he owned some race cars and Ferrara Spring and Auto Parts. But that was an era where Frank kind of was in the fishbowl with the rest of us. But when my dad was pursuing his passion to purchase the Stafford Motor Speedway, Frank had moved on to the Northeastern Midget Association. And I can remember as a young man watching this flagman, along with greats like Earl Grant, entertaining the crowd, and it was always those midget flagmen that had a set of couillons, man, because they weren't afraid and they were very classic with the way they did it. And that was my first opportunity to work side by side with Frank Ferrara. But the story that most people don't realize is we talk about the Ferrara 100 and the extra distance event that it was, but many of you have given my father credit for things that he doesn't deserve credit for. And the owner-driver's point fund is one that he must share credit with one Frank Ferrara for. You see, at that time, the drivers received all of the glory and all of the honors, and oh yeah, I got paid in cash. And then the owner would wait around, and hopefully he'd be right there between the beer stand and the payoff window to get that money and be able to distribute it. But at the end of the year, the owner was the one that had to get the car ready to be campaigned the following season, and the driver just had to see if he could con somebody out of a brand new helmet. And Frank and my dad, over one too many scotches one evening, decided that the best thing that could take care of the future of modified racing was creating something called an owner-driver point fund. Yes, it was Frank Ferrara and my father in concert that then lobbied NASCAR because it was against NASCAR rules to distribute any monies to owners. And the owner-driver point fund got its first boot in the rear end by Frank Ferrara in the Ferrara 100. And from there, in the golden era, car owners like Dick Armstrong, car owners like Bobby Judkins, car owners like Joe Brady, at the end of the season's ending banquet, received even more than the individual drivers did, as they deserved. Now, the next iteration of Frank Ferrara is one that has always confounded me. You would think as a sponsor, and he was probably the first man that I knew that understood what Napa stood for and brought Napa into auto racing, he decided, when most of us want to slow down, that he and his partners were going to build a dirt track in Westfield, Massachusetts, at the end of a runway. Now, Frank Ferrara and his family had been campaigning mini sprints because of his love affair with open cockpit racing. And all of a sudden he decided, geez, maybe I ought to be a track operator. He quickly became more than just a track operator. And for those of us that have enjoyed the experience at the Whip City Speedway, racing every Saturday night, we came to enjoy Frank Ferrara's presence. But I want to share with you a story that occurred there one night. You know, Frank's getting a little on in age, right? And he has a quad, and as only Frank Ferrara could have, he had to have one that was souped up. And Frank got all excited one night because those of us that suffered what my father used to refer to as helmet acylitis, that's when you put your helmet on and all original thought and all sanity ceases. We decided to dice it up down in turns 3 and 4, and the track is all crossed over. Frank forgets that there's a 3-foot berm separating the infield from the racetrack. And wide open in his quad, he looked like Evel Knievel as he raced to the scene of the accident. But at the end of it, we all knew that Frank Ferrara had an abiding passion for something that had consumed him since he was a youngster. If you have a passion for something, you also have a commitment. Junior Johnson once told me the difference between being involved and being committed. When you sit down to breakfast, it's bacon and eggs. The chicken was involved, the pig was committed. Frank Ferrara has been committed to the world of motorsports, specifically here in the New England area, since a very young age. I am humbled and I am honored, number one, to consider Frank Ferrara like a second father. But more importantly, on this very special occasion, I am deeply honored to introduce to you the newest member of the Near Racing Hall of Fame, Mr. Frank Ferrara.
Well, you can't see it, it's a trophy. It reads, if I can see it, S12, won by Sweet Anderson, Riverside Park, June 3rd, 1951. Owner, Frank Ferrara. This was a 75 lapper. This is when Harvey was really throwing his money around. The S12 has a meaning. My grandfather started a business, a blacksmith shop, in 1912. And in 2012, we're going to be in business 100 years. Thank you. I know quite a few of you have been to Whip City, but those of you who haven't, just give you a little rundown on what we do. In the afternoon, we run several divisions of go-karts on a small track, and we start the youngsters off at 8 years old. On the big track, we run two-stroke go-karts. They're faster. We have a youth sprint division. These are kids coming out of quarter midgets. I think it's 12 to 16, just to give them a stepping stone into another class. And we have a four-cylinder stock division. This is a four-cylinder cars. They're stock, and they have all the safety equipment. At night, we have 6 divisions of mini sprints. We have a modified light division. These are dirt modified bodies on them. We have a quad 4. Quad 4s are midgets with 4-cylinder Oldsmobile engines in them. They don't run wings, and this is a growing division. You can check with Skip Mazik on that one. He built a car last year, and he's building another one for next year. We also have a 2-seater car. We give rides, and that's very good. It's been working out fine. People love to get in it and take a ride. I have a home in Edgewater, Florida. It's right next to New Smyrna Beach, and we have quite a few old-timers down here. Bob Juckins is just down the road. Bob built a good-sized garage in his backyard, and that's our hangout. Bugsy's just down below Bobby. We're blessed. I told Bugsy I'd buy him an oceanfront condo in Miami if he'd move down there. He says, no, I think I'll stick around and aggravate everybody. They have John McCarthy, Don Matarosian, Leo Clary, Bob Summers, George Summers, Gene Bergen. He's up the road a little ways. We don't see him that often, but once in a while. Skip Matzik. Ron Bouchard comes up on special occasions. Golf. Billy Harmon, Eddie and Ellen Crusoe, Greg Narducci, John and Pat Norman, Earl Grant, Jim Winks, Jerry Dostey, and Bill Simmons. Now, we don't see each other all the time, but when we get together, it's a good time. We enjoy it. We're talking old times over. This is going to be short. I'm going to introduce some people to you. First of all, my family, my 2 daughters, 2 son-in-laws, and 5 grandchildren, and I have a son in California with a grandchild. Daughters over here, and my grandsons are over here, and granddaughter. My good friends for over 40 years, and my partners at Whip City Speedway, Lois and Dave Paghetti. We have a girl working at our racetrack. She started out selling billboards, and she did everything she could to help build the racetrack. She runs our banquet. She fills in on Saturday nights when people are out, except for starting, and she says, I can do a better job than she can. Her name is Pat Norman. We have a gentleman with us tonight. He's also started out with us day one, building a track. He started out on heavy equipment. He can fix just about anything. He spent countless hours at the racetrack. He retired last year, but he's with us today. His name is Harry Wood. Everybody calls him Uncle Harry. Jackie, thank you again. You did a fine job. I want to thank, wait, one more. Wow. Boy, the most important one. 2 years ago, I went to a singles dance. Oh, boy. And I met a lovely lady, and we have a little communication problems. We're together, just the two of us. You keep saying, y'all. And I turn around and see if somebody else is there, but nobody's ever there. Anyway, she came up for the special occasion. Her name is Jane Wilkins. Jackie, thank you very much for introducing me, and thank you all for this honor.
Our next presenter has one of the best voices in motorsports, and he's used it to distinction for more than 30 years. He's been a radio host, one of the first people ever to have their own cable TV shows devoted exclusively to auto racing. He's been a track announcer at Lee Speedway, and probably one of the reasons that the Modified Racing Series has become so popular so quickly is because they have this man preaching the gospel. One of the best in the business, John Spence.
A little show and tell. For those of you who've been around, you know what that's all about. You know, when the lights went out, I thought it was back at Hudson. First of all, I want to say that it is indeed a pleasure and an honor to be a part of this year's induction ceremony. It is extremely pleasing to see 3 drivers from my neck of the woods getting the call. 3 racers I have had the pleasure of doing the call of their many years of feature wins. Vic Miller and the great drivers that have strapped into his cars over the years, Mike Murphy and Pete Fiandaca. They were all an announcer's dream. Thanks for the memories, guys. Pete Fiandaca, where do you begin? Probably we should start by asking the question, how many drivers, officials, crew members, or promoters here today have raced with Peter, or Peter has raced for? Just give us a show of hands. I'm curious to find that out. I will get quite a few. You know, many times in my announcing career, I've had the opportunity to make reference to what's in a number. It's always interesting to learn how drivers arrive at their car number. And for Peter, he launched his career with number 35. He went to Seekonk one night, and when he signed in, 126 registered cars were ahead of him. So he pulled out of the line and waited a bit, and he let 8 cars go by. And then he dropped back into the line so he could still carry the digits 3 and 5 on the speedway. It was that night at the Cement Palace that the number 135 originally graced the side of Pete Fiandaca's racers. His career began back in 1967 with an assault on the Westboro Speedway and Hudson Speedway and the so-called B Division. 1968 saw the late Anthony Vandetti operating Westboro and Seekonk, so Peter went and raced for the Godfather. 1969 saw Pete move into the Grand Dam Division up the road here at Riverside Park and at Westboro as he raced for the late great Harvey Tattersall, one of the very best promoters. In the early 70s, Hudson, the Pines, and Monadnock Speedway became home to the kid from Fitchburg in late model competition. The modified division became a way of life for Peter in 1973 as he moved into the open wheel race cars at the park, Hudson, Monadnock, and Star, and a pinto-bodied modified. And it became clear at that point that Peter was going to move around and race at other tracks. In 1975, Hudson official Stevie Bird jumped on board and turned the wrenches, hitting the highway with the number 135. In 76, the famed Gremlin became Peter's chariot as he carried the names of Guilfoyle's Mobile and Jan Morgan Ceramics to Victory Lane all over the Northeast. The biggest win, a 200-lapper up the road at the park. Birdie stayed on board through the end of 1978. He was replaced by Stu Campbell as crew chief from 79 to 95. Bill Hurley and John McDonald also played a major part in Peter's career in over 25 years. In the late 70s, Peter became known as the Traveler Man, That was a moniker given him by the late Speedway scene columnist Joe LaRochelle. And the reason was simple. He would race anytime. In fact, he became the 70s version of an Eastern bandit. He traveled anywhere, raced anywhere, making his presence known everywhere, and often barely making it back to Fitchburg with a couple of bucks in his pocket. It was not uncommon for the traveling man to hit the road after a weekend of racing at his local tracks. One year he headed out to New Egypt on Tuesday, deadheaded to Catamount for a Wednesday night show. He eyeballed to Seacock on Thursday, but his then companion said, "Let's go sightseeing." So Peter obliged, but he had his sights set on Monadnock on the way back to Fitchburg on Friday night, and then he started the whole racing weekend over again. One season, Peter raced and won at Thompson, taking the checkered flag at 6:25 at night. He loaded up, headed for Hudson, arriving at 8:55 p.m. I know, I called that race. At 9:15, he had second place money in his pocket, and he was on his way back to Fitchburg. His famous shop was his driveway, where he prepared for his race cars on a weekly basis. If it rained, the race car just simply was not worked on. If he had to pull the motor, it was off to the backyard to a big tree he would use as a chain fall. One of those trees had limbs in it that had a Y shape to it, perfect for straightening bent frames and warped roll cages. Truly a low buck operation. In 1980, Peter rolled out with another late model. This one was dubbed Skid Row. Perhaps you remember it. It was the car that debuted the now famous Maxwell House coffee can. Peter was always good until the last drop. The 1980s through today saw the traveling man race late models, pro stocks, and Bud Lights as Star Hudson and Monadnock. And today, he continues 43, going into his 44th season at Hudson Speedway, where it all began back in 1967. All totaled, for 43 years, Peter has competed well over 2,000 races at 25 racetracks from the Northeast to Florida, winning 322 features and 19 track titles along the way. An incredible feat. A couple of other things I'd like to mention before closing. Back in 1978, when I debuted a weekly radio show in Nashua, New Hampshire, I wanted to kick that program off with impact, make some noise, give racing a big boost. I reached out to Pete Fiandaca. He was our first in-studio guest. He did that first show and he jammed our telephone lines that night. And in between the calls, I asked Peter a couple of questions. One was, you were the first driver in these parts, when I'm talking up at the Star, Lee, Hudson area, one of the first drivers in these parts to invite the kids in the grandstands in the victory lane for the victory lane photo. I asked him, I said, what's that all about? And he said to me simply, every one of those kids are the future of this sport, whether they end up out here on the racetrack or they bring their kids to the races someday, and we have to take care of them. The other question was, I always see you making the sign of the cross before the start of every feature. His response was, I did that the first night I raced back in 1967. A couple of times, I had to pull my guardian angel back in the window. I said, why is that, Pete? He was scared. You know, like Nomar and Manny in baseball, Peyton and Eli in football, Richie and Dale in racing, the mere mention of his first name, Peter, everyone, young and old, knows who you are talking about. Peter, there's a couple of guys that are not with us today that I know they are looking down with thumbs up and smiling faces, and that's the old bomb rat, Bob Devaney and Stu Campbell. And for them, I congratulate you both. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my extreme pleasure to present to you and to the 2010 Near Hall of Fame, the driver of the famed 135, the traveling man, Pete Fiandaca.
I'm going to start this off by we were driving up Main Street, Jamie White, Andy Johnson, and myself, and on the radio it came along that Pete Fiandaca's in Fitchburg driving up on Main Street. listening to the radio with his Thunderbird. I'm going to donate this song to him, Ricky Nelson, the Traveling Man. And Andy Johnson said, how did you do that? And I said, it's John Spence. He's the announcer at Hudson Speedway, and he's also a radio disc jockey, and he just done it for us. And Andy Johnson says, we're pretty major, and I said, yes, we are. I'm glad that I got to race my way in, and I'm happy to say that I did it out of my backyard. I have to thank some people. These guys will help me right from the start. Vic Angus, Dave Rosbach, Stevie Bird, Archie Ashambo, the Bakers, the Mackeys, Texas Engines, Bob Johnson. Bob Renstrom, when he used to go to the races and see his name over the driver's door, he'd say to me, Pete, I'm the driver, let me buy some tires. I called Marvin Rifkin once and said, I'd like to run that big show at Seekonk. I think I got a way we can beat him. He says to me, I'm an M&H dealer, not a McQuarrie dealer. I said, Marvin, do you want to win the race? He said, sure. I said, the tire has straight edges across the top. It's got no crown in it. With that machine you got out back, we can redesign the tire and we can win the race. He says, how many do you need? I said, 10. He said, you want me to pay for them? I said, of course. Sunday morning, I blew the motor at Saturday night, and I called him and said I couldn't go. He says, what do I do? I said, get Babe Branscombe and Bobby Gahan to run the tires. They'll do just fine. The only kind of car that I never drove and wish I did was a cut-down. Ronnie Bouchard had the prettiest cut-down, nicest looking. Tinker Prochen and Vic Angus had the fastest cut-down, and Reno Tolonen had the most unique cut-down of the three. But my favorite car was, every day when I walked home from school, I'd stop at the Flying A station for 2 years. They had a novice car from Star Speedway, from Brookline Speedway, and it was purple with a red zero. It was a 33 Chrysler Coupe, and Tinker Prochen drove it. That was the nicest looking car from Fitchburg. I remember getting a lot of great advice over the years. Frank Michelson told me if I drive in hard and get on the gas quicker coming out, I can beat a car that's better than mine. Oscar Ridlin told me, you're losing your rhythm, Pete, with 5 to go. He said, when you see that flag man put his hand out with 5 to go, sit back in the seat and say to yourself, there's 25 or 30 laps to go and you'll be just fine. He also told me just to run Hudson in the Pines and he'd make me a star. And I said, Oscar, I want to drive a race car. I don't want to be a star. Billy Greco, I asked him once, how do you make that move from the top to the bottom? Billy says, make the move, think about it. Do you know what I mean? And I said, yeah, Bill. If I think about it, the hole won't be there. You know what I mean. Dave Dion ran Norwood on Saturday nights. I ran Star on Saturday nights. He came up to me at Hudson and said, how did you do? And I said, terrible. Guys I can run with when they come down from Star to Hudson, I couldn't even keep up. I was 2 laps down. He said to me, Pete, you're not driving and setting the car up right. You got to set her up with a lot of wedge and stagger and drive her off the right rear. I went back the following week and finished 8th and been driving off the right rear ever since. Grumpy Judkins had an ad in the back of a magazine on the back page for Hayes Clutches that said, you got to finish before you can win. And I figured he was right. If I could finish, maybe I could win one. It's so important to listen to advice, but you still have to pick it apart and use what works for yourself. Anthony Vendetti said to everybody, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? And I said, I can get them both at the market, it doesn't matter. I just want to say that for 30 years, the guy that made us all look better than we were was Val Lasser. The name was Speedway Scene, but he called it the paper. I think what helped me get into the Hall of Fame is that drivers are lucky to have 2 or 3 good cars in their career. I had 10 to 12 good cars. Marty Hardy also told me there's more good drivers than good cars, and he was right. I was lucky that I had the right car at the right time. At Riverside Park, in the 1970s, I had a Gremlin that was perfect for that place. It was such a good car that I could take it to Monadnock and Hudson without changing a thing. The smaller tracks seemed to suit my style of driving. I raced against all the great drivers over the years, but different drivers were tougher at different tracks. Like Mike Murphy and Bobby Dean always brought the best out in me at Hudson Speedway. At Star, there was all the Bezansons, all the Browns, all the Baldwins, Duncan Miller, Steve Koloski. They were all great to race with. At Monadnock and Riverside Park, there was so many good drivers and so many good cars that it was tough just to get in the feature. Looking back, I was able to race against a lot of great drivers at a lot of great racetracks. I got along with almost every track official I ever dealt with. I had my own way of communicating with them. A guy at Star Speedway said to me, "I'm the janitor where Carl Merrill has his office in Newton, Mass." He was some kind of selectman or something. And I asked him if he could do me a favor, and he said, sure. I dismounted a tire from Monadnock, and I wrote on it, "These tires are junk, Peter Fiandaca 135. And I asked him if he'd put it on his desk Monday morning before he got to work. And when I came to Monadnock on Friday, I was coming down the hill to the pit. Carl Merrill was coming down the tire, and he met me at the bottom. He says, "I don't know how you do it, but I understand these tires are junk." I was watching The Hustler. Paul Newman was great. He looked good, made all the right moves, done everything that a great actor should do. Then walked in Jackie Gleason and stole the show by being himself. I was so impressed by that. I thought from that day on, if I just be myself, I'll do good. Thank you. Peace, peace.
If you ever pick up a program in the past, there's a good chance you'll see an article by this man. He has led the motorsports press in most bylines for many years, Peter Vanderveer.
One thing about Matt Buckler, he always makes you look good. I'm in a tough spot here as the fourth presenter. First off, we had a nationally recognized writer. Then we had a guy whose charisma and abilities took him all the way to the top in the television business. And then we had one of the best announcers to ever come out of New England. So I guess I hit cleanup. I'll see what I can do here. Most of us have observed the water's surface at low tide, how calm and everything appears. There is little turbulence to the waves as they leap upon the shore. Or if you spent time watching the sun rise or set, you can always depend on its occurrence every day. Those two elements of nature are appropriate in characterizing our next inductee, Mystic Connecticut's Bob Garbarino. Calmness and consistency are trademarks of this man's near 50-year career. Add devotion, hard work, along with passion, and you pretty much complete Garbarino's picture. Think about it. Barb Garbarino has been fielding race cars for 50 years. That's far longer than half the lifetime of most of us in this room. It all began for Bob back in 1959 when he and his friend Butch Majette built a Bomber Division car out by the garage, something you did in those days, and headed off to the Waterford Speed Bowl. We used a tow bar to get the car to the track, Bob said. It wasn't a very pretty sight, but it was a start. What followed was a Sportsman Division car the next season, then a modified the year after that. Once those skills were honed, Bob Garbarino ventured to the tracks like Stafford and Thompson, and the list of drivers began to be compiled. Through the years, we've seen Dick Watson, Ted Stack, Gene Burgeon, Ed Flemke, Leo Cleary, Brian Ross, Jeff Bodine, Bugsy Stevens, Satch Worley, Tim Conley, Robbie Summers, Jerry Marquis, Chuck Hosfeld, and Donnie Leah slide themselves into Garbarino cars. That group alone would make one of New England's finest highlight reels. When NASCAR went with its present team format, tour format, Bob Garbarino was there. Stevens got Garbarino his first tour win, and Satch Worley captured what Bob still considers the biggest victory of his career, the 1991 Race of Champions at Pocono. Good points finished followed were always there, but never a championship. What transpired after the end of the 2006 season and before the beginning of the 2007 season would change all of that. Garbarino answered the phone one day at his Mystic River Marina business, and on the other end was a young, brash Long Islander named Donnie Leah. Here was a kid with raw talent. Leah had a knack for creating excitement, but it didn't always happen between the apron and the retaining wall. I knew that Bob was looking for a driver, Leah said recently. I thought we could put a deal together. Now, when you think about Garbarino and Leah, it certainly doesn't appear to be a match made in heaven, not even here on earth. One of Bob Garbarino's strongest traits is his ability to see talent, says veteran motorsports writer Pete Zanardi, a Hall of Fame member. In most cases, Bob is a terrific listener. In this instance, he did most of the talking, and Donnie listened. Bob's wife, Joan, has a much easier explanation as to why it worked. They're both Italian, she said. It's that simple. Somehow, Garbarino, Leo, and that Mystic Missile crew were able to harness all the pieces together. I knew one thing, Leah said. I couldn't let this man down. He was willing to take a chance on me. He means so much to racing, New England racing. Bob works as hard as anyone on the team. Some people thought that winning these 2 championships was all about big horsepower and lots of money. It wasn't. There was more to it. In what is part of the twilight years of Bob and Joan's racing career together, they had their first championship. A second one came along this past season. My greatest joy in all these years of working with Bob, says crew member Greg Schroeder, was to see Bob and Joan hoist that first championship trophy in the air. Bob is one of those special people, Schroeder added. He tends to think differently than others. There could be chaos and verbal hurricanes all around, but Bob would always be that voice of reason. Over the years, the relationship between NASCAR and Bob Garbarino has, more times than not, been a convivial one. When NASCAR looked for answers to difficult matters within the division, it was usually Bob who provided them. One incident, however, revealed another side of Bob's character. For whatever reason, several NASCAR officials thought it would be a better idea if those nicknames, like Mystic Missile, would be removed from the car's roof lines. Even the notion of the thought didn't set well with Bob. I made the suggestion to one official, Bob said, that maybe it was time to open the back gate so that I could bring my hauler inside, load up, and go home. My point seemed to be well taken. Mystic Missile, like the word Woodchopper Special and Old Blue, are names linked to the romantic era of this sport. I have a picture in my motor coach of the Mystic Missile and Old Blue coming to the finish line. I believe it was at Thompson, Bob says. Not only are the drivers visible, so are the actions of the cars. When people watch modified racing, there's a sense of rawness to it. There's so much beauty to these cars. When he's asked about this wonderful, lengthy career that's unfolded in front of him, Bob likes to tack it together this way. It begins with a competitive drive. You want to win. I've never been complacent, never wanted to a 6th, 7th, or 8th place finish. Then, when you're around for a while, it becomes an addiction, and eventually that translates into a passion. Once that's gone, the passion, you might as well think about retirement. That final phase isn't anywhere to be found in this man's future. Their love of warm weather and boats have taken the Garberinos south each winter. It's a chance to spend time with so many racing friends in Florida. Most of March is spent with Bob's brother Skip in Naples. That's where the boat park comes in. We have a boat down at the Mystic Marina, Bob says. I guess we will use it someday. Right now, our summers are filled up, and apparently they will be for some time. It is my distinct pleasure to present to you Mr. Bob Garbarino for induction into the 2010 class of the New England Auto Racers Hall of Fame. Bob?
Well, he kind of stole most of my thunder. He used all my favorite words, but when Peter said that this day may happen, I really was thinking, when it comes to the near, the Hall of Fame and the people in near, there must be a link that ties them all together. There must be a thread that everybody's hooked onto. And as I thought about it, the thread that kept coming up was commitment. We've heard commitment used a few times tonight, but I think that there's so many people in this organization and belong to, are members of the hall, but I think they're there because of the commitment that they made, whether it be a reporter, the media people, track people, competitors, fans. They're absolutely committed, and I think that's what makes racing so much different than other sports. We have people that this is what they want to do, and they do it. When I started racing, as Peter mentioned, it was kind of the challenge of the competition. It was a competitiveness that got me into it. And then I was into it for a while, and you wake up one morning and you say, boy, I gotta be careful, I'm getting addicted to this thing. And that's true, and I think you all sense that at some point in time. But then there's something that goes beyond that, and that's what some have referred to a passionate commitment. And that's what keeps us in it. That's what makes it so special. Jackie took it from me, of course. I was going to tell you about Junior Johnson's, how you describe commitment, but Jackie did that for me, thank him. But I think that's why everybody is here. They've been committed. It was nice to see Frank tonight. I have to say to Frank, I've got the toolbox that says Ferraro 100 with 100 silver dollars in it. I still have it. And so it just becomes a lifelong commitment. I have certainly many people to thank. I have to start with my wife, Joan. She's always supported me and my family, because if those groups aren't with you, it's pretty difficult. But then there's the competitors, and a number of them belong to this hall that have either driven for me or been part of the team. And they're there because they were committed to do it. And I'm humbly honored to be inducted into this thing. I don't have as long a speech as some of the other guys, but I can tell you from here, it's there. I think this is a great organization that recognizes people, not myself necessarily, but other people that have done things, and I'm proud to be a part of it, and I'm absolutely thankful. Thank you.
Our next presenter, one of the most exciting drivers in New England. He could take a super modified and put it through one of those holes in a screen door. We have seen him do it many times, and he has done it especially during the last 4 years with 4 consecutive championships in the International Super Modified Association. Of course, we're talking about one man, the Raleigh Rocket, Chris Purley.
How do I introduce Vic Miller? What can I say about him? I tried to look up all this information on him, try to find how his career went, who wrote about him, but I think he started so early there wasn't any paper or printing presses or anything, so, you know, back when the wheel was wood type of deal, so I'm gonna wing it, see what I can find out. Vic Miller started his racing career back in 1965, racing at the Norwood Arena in the hobby division or limited sportsman. By 1969, and I was only 2 then, he had teamed up with the legendary Ollie Silva and was running modifieds in the first Super that Vic had built. Who would have thought this would lead to one of the most impressive and successful super modified careers that we would ever see? The winning drivers that we would see in Vic's cars include, of course, Ollie Silva, Don McLaren, Eddie West, Bentley Warren, all Hall of Famers, Larry Record, the late Jim Cheney and George Munson, Gene Lee Gibson, Nate Boutwell, Mike Ordway Sr., Davey Hamilton, Eddie Bellinger Jr., and me. His cars have won from Maine to California, Canada to Florida, over 35 tracks in 11 states, from the bull rings of Hudson and Pine Speedway to the large tracks of Oswego and Thompson Speedways. Throughout the evolution of the offset supermodified, Vic's cars haven't changed much from the Frank Bartel creation that he built back in the early 80s. His four-bar design has won against the leaf spring, coilover, cantilever coilover, inboard pull rod design, and whatever else was thrown into the mix. Vic's cars have been the simplest out there. People keep coming over to the cars in the pits and saying to each other, there's no way that this car's even going to compete with those new style cars. But after the race is done, they seem to change their tune. Then they're just looking at the car, shaking their heads, looking it all over and trying to find the secret. There's no secret. Vic just builds a nice, clean, simple, strong car that works. He doesn't build anything fancy. There isn't any chrome or shiny paint. His favorite thing is Krylon spray paint. It's easy touch-up, he says. He builds everything in his garage. That isn't much of a garage. It's just a walkout basement in his ranch-style home. That's the only space that Lana gives him. His basement has all he needs: a lathe, a Bridgeport, tube and bender, welder, drill press, washer and dryer, refrigerator for all the beer that's on sale. The phrase cheapest man in racing doesn't exactly pertain to the race car, though. He doesn't skimp on the car, but he doesn't buy any more than he has to. Take the shocks, for instance. Vix is on the ISMA board of directors, and they were having a rules meeting on talking about the price of shocks and what to do to put the cap on how much money is spending on them. So they were going around to each member and asking them how much they paid for shocks. The members were saying 500 each, 800 each, 1,000 each. You know, they were getting pricey. And they got to Vic. He said 400. So they said, see, even Vic pays $1,600 for a set of shocks. Vic says, no, 400. 400 for the set. You see, Vic goes to Thompson Flea Market, finds somebody with a bucket of broken shocks, brings those home, puts a couple together, puts them on the car. That's it. It's not cheap, just efficient. What's a shock anyway? I think we've won quite a few races where they're falling off anyway, right? Even the number 11 on the car, simple, 2 pieces of duct tape, inexpensive. But seriously, I started racing for Vic in 1995 and didn't know what to expect. All I know is that his cars went fast with anyone in them, so I knew I might have a chance if I drove for him. Well, my first race at Star, I learned a lot about Vic. You see, I didn't even make it past the warm-ups when I kind of hit the 4th turn wall a little, or a lot. And I figured that my career with Vic was over before it even started. But Vic just shrugged his shoulders, chomped on a cigar, and went back to the clubhouse, which was his old cube van hauler. Had another beer. That was it. Didn't get excited. He's been around, seen it all, never puts any pressure on you. He just wants you to go out there and give it your best shot. That's all. Whatever happens, happens. Makes it easy for a racer to race for him. And who wouldn't want to, from his records? His cars are simple, safe, and fast. But of course, what he's done, he's got 6 ISMA championships in 3 seconds out of 10 years. He's won 8 World Series events at Thompson, 6 Star Speedway Classics, 5 Super National victories at Oswego, 4 Sandusky Speedway high milers in a row, multi-track championships at Star and Lee, everywhere, places I don't even know, track records at least probably 7 different tracks, 5 wins at Berlin Speedway in Michigan, plus the Florida 200 at Golden Gate Speedway in Tampa, the Gold Coast Classic Series at Roseville, California, topping a 102-car field, the Firecracker 10,000 at Hudson, 4 wins at Mansfield, Ohio, and just many more. I don't know how many wins. I don't know if he knows how many wins he's had, but for over 45 years, Victor showed us that a small low-buck team with the right equipment and knowledge and a little effort can compete with the best of them and actually become the best. I just want to congratulate Vic and my opportunity to present him in the 13th Annual New England Auto Racers Hall of Fame.
Well, I really don't know what to say right now. I think Chris has probably pretty well said it all. Just looking around at all the people that are in this room, I see Leo Clary and just so many good drivers. Billy Harmon, I noticed right behind me and stuff. And it's just a lot of fun to come here and see all these people. And I watched them race. I talked to George Savory a little while ago. And this is really an honor. And but I haven't done this alone. I had my family, my wife Lana, and my son-in-law, and the children and everything, and it's really something. But the thing I'd like to say is I own the car, but it's all the guys that work on it. And over in the corner somewhere over there, it's not a crew, it's a mob. But most of them are with me for like 25 years, and it's really something because we wouldn't be anywhere near where we are without all those guys working. They do anything it takes, and that's the reason we're here. Scott LeClaire, Phil Rice, I just can't name everybody because there's been so many people over the years that have helped me and worked on the cars and stuff. And you know, we've had, like Chris mentioned, all the drivers, Bentley Warren, Ollie Silver, and Nate Botwell, and Chris Purley. Obviously, we've had so much success with him. And one little thing I'd like to say, we were at a Berlin Speedway about 3 or 4 years ago, and I mentioned to Chris, I said, you know, if you ever win the feature here, just do me a favor. You know, when they interview you, just get up and say, I did it all myself. The crew is lousy, the owner is cheap. Well, he did, he got up and said that. And the place went nuts. I mean, the place was packed. Johnny Benson's involved with the track out there, and the crowd just went wild. And every once in a while, we all think back to that, and it was just unbelievable when he said that. The crowd just erupted. But one thing I'd like to say, I'd like to thank Eddie Shea and R&R Engines. They've done a tremendous job. Eddie Shea helping us out with anything we need for the cars, and R&R Engines, Ricky Moore there, they've given us tremendous horsepower and reliability. We still have one engine we're running from back in the middle 90s, and it's still, you know, it can win today. But I don't know what else I could say. I'd just like to thank everyone for coming and seeing all some new faces and a lot of the old faces that I've seen around the racetrack. And thank you all very much.
Making the next presentation is a man from Salisbury, Massachusetts. 50-year involvement in motorsports. He's done just about everything. Photographer, historian, has restored cars. He has been the chairman 4 times of the Legends of Auto Racing banquet that raises money for charity. And he is a winner in 2007 of the Coastal 181 Award for contributions to auto racing. Let's welcome Wes Pettengill.
We're here tonight to also honor the flying school teacher, Mr. Mike Murphy. Mike campaigned out of Woburn, Mass. for 30+ years. He was Irishman tough, he fought hard, and he fought clean. My first memory of Mike was in 1964, 5 years into Mike's career, at the Pine Speedway in Groveland, Massachusetts. Mike had just won the feature event, his first feature event in that Pink Panther number 28. And think of the people that he outran that night. Hall of Famers Ollie Silver, Don McLaren, Eddie West. He got to race with so many of the greats in his early career and so many of them later on. Mike pulls up to the starter's box to receive the checkers, and of course the car had a clutch back then. He drops it into gear and takes his victory lap and turns on his 1955 Chevy taillights. And I can tell you at 14 years old, that was one of the coolest things that I had ever seen. 55 Chevy taillights on the back of a race car. And of course, Don McLaren complained later on that Mike was flicking that switch off and on as brake lights and messing up Mac's hot lap that he was trying to turn. Mike Murphy campaigned in coupes, cut downs, early super modifieds, late models, pro stocks, Yankee modifieds. And I also want to interrupt myself here. I have been in the back of this room for a few years, and I thought to myself, my driver didn't get in this year. Somebody from down south or somebody from up north got in, and my driver didn't get in. If you don't happen to know Mike Murphy, he drove his way into the Hall of Fame tonight. Listen to some of these stats. Over 3 decades of racing, 8 track championships, including Pro Stock champion in 1999 at Star Speedway. Also under the Nesmer banner, 22 features in a row at Hudson Speedway, breaking the record of Jimmy Martell at Star Speedway up on the north side of the New England. Jimmy Martell won 21 in 1970, and Mike Murphy was able to beat that record with 22 straight features at Hudson Speedway. But the real story has to be the family behind Mike. Later in his career, the 28 became the M3 for my 3 sons. Steve, Paul, and Doug were there in the pits. Wife Julie was on board, and it became a family affair with all the family involved in racing. Mike Murphy passed away at age 70, and more importantly, he got to know his importance in racing. At the Lee USA Speedway, on an Ollie Silver Classic event, Mike Murphy was deemed Grand Marshal of the night. Dozens of drivers and fans got to meet and greet Mike and tell him just what he meant as a fan, as a fellow driver. He got to hear it before he passed on. And there's one last thing I'd like to mention. It must have been about 3 or 4 years ago at the Pine Speedway reunion in Groveland, Mass., and a bunch of us were standing around with Hall of Famer Bentley Warren. And Bentley was asked, in all of your career, in all of your racing, and a lot of it took place around the world, who was the toughest guy to get by? And he pondered for a minute, and the name Mike Murphy came up. Ladies and gentlemen, it's with great honor that we hereby induct Mike Murphy into the Hall of Fame, and here to accept his induction, his son, Doug Murphy.
Peter, I'm not going to stay up here as long as you did. I'm not going to be up here as long as Jeff did. One thing I'd like to say, on the back of the program, I don't want to be echoing, the back of the program, I think my dad actually made these 2 rules for Nesmer. the very bottom it says, have fun, and there's my rule number 2, don't forget the beer. I could stand up here all day and speak about my dad, on the impact he had on everybody. On behalf of my brothers and my mother, I would like to thank NEA, the NEA committee, Doug Farrell, for inducting Dad into the Hall of Fame. I would like to thank Red and Judy McDonald, Kenny Smith, Russ Conway, for being a part of Dad's legacy. Thank you to Dad's friends, which a lot of them are here, fans, the guys he raced against, who supported him also through his 40-year career. Dad breathed and lived to go racing. It was all about family and fun. In memory of our dad, thank you.
Now, making our next presentation is a man who has really been involved in preserving the history of motorsports. Among the cars that he has restored, Mike Murphy's Gremlin, Richie Evans and Jeff Bodine's Pinto, and the Vegas for George Savory and George Summers. And currently, one of the hardworking crew members for the cruiser, Carl Oberg. Of course, I'm talking about Mark Alden.
George, last year we tried getting you into the 2009 Hall of Fame, and you didn't make the final cut. So Sandy said to me this year, what can we do to get George in? So when the ballots were sent out, we took a picture of Sandy and put it next to your name. So if you think you're getting on your accolades, I think it's because of your beautiful wife. George started racing in 1960 at the old Norwood Arena in the sportsman division. And quite frankly, he really wasn't that good. But in 1965, he won his first feature. And then in 1970, he won the sportsman NASCAR, the old sportsman NASCAR division, and that qualified him for the Permitex 300 race down in Daytona. So George was starting to get it together. In 71 to 74, he drove Bobby Melnick's Busch car, the old Busch series up north. And then in 75, the famous Vega wagon came out, the Pete Hamilton Vega wagon. And George was a household name. I mean, he was winning on Friday nights at Westboro Speedway, then going down to Seekonk and winning the bounties that were placed on him. He was just winning. And he carried that all the way through to 1979. And then in the 80s, he tried driving the Mellow Yellow Pinto. And when the cost of modified racing started to escalate, George decided to go Pro 4 racing. Back again with C.J. Robinson, they bought a Pro 4 from Rolly Lindblad, and it took George a little time to figure it out, and then he literally owned the Pro 4 division to the day he retired. Picking up championships at Riverside Park, Thompson Speedway, New Smyrna Speedway, and of course countless Pro 4 division titles. He won his last race in 2001 when he hung up his helmet for the very last time, but that was quite a weekend because on Friday when they were testing at the World Series, the car blew their only engine, and the crew worked all night. They had to get the engine builder out of a bar room to open up and bore an engine, and they put it back together with used pistons and used rings, and George said, this is never gonna work, this is never gonna work. But the crew, they stuck by him, they said, just get in the car and go. They made it back to Thompson for the 5 o'clock. George got in the car, started dead last, and within 5 laps he was leading, and he had won his final race. It was kind of sad to see George hang up his helmet, but as we all know, everybody has to retire sooner or later. George is also winning ways have carried over in his personal life. He's owner of George's Auto Body, Premier Auto Body Shop in Needham. And he also has 4 wonderful children. And of course, Richard is still carrying on the Savory name, racing unmodified today, all around New England. George and Sandy can be seen at all the local racetracks. and local car shows. They still participate, and you see them all over, and people coming up to them, talking to them about those famous rides, the Vega Wagon and the Pro 4 division. So at this time, would you please give a big round of applause for the winningest driver ever to come out of Gasoline Alley in Needham, Mr. George Savory.
I think some of the accomplishments are going a lot easier than this. First of all, I've got to thank Mark Alden for taking all the time he did to help get me in this thing, which I never thought I would be. This is an accomplishment far beyond anything. Anybody that's got in here today or been in here in the past, it just doesn't get any better than this. And it's guys like Mark Alden, that takes his time all the board members are that donate their time to care about what we've done. There's just not enough words to say what you really would say. It's in your heart. It's just not there. I'm beside myself. I never, in my longest dream, ever would have believed I'd be here. I was just so proud to have raced with, walked with, talked to car owners, mechanics, and some of the drivers that, still want to talk to me. The likes of Mike Murphy, I'm more than proud. I've raced with him for years and hit with his wife for years. Pete Fiandaca, little guy, accomplished more than most people will ever accomplish in their lifetime, and is still a great, great person. I've met a lot of nice people. I got a lot of help from a lot of race car drivers. From the start of my career, when I met Donnie McTavish, when I was just a kid, and we were working together, and he introduced me to this sport. Good, bad, or indifferent, it turned out well. It was a passion. I had the fortune to have his mechanic and car owner come with me back then and decide, hey, maybe we could do this. Well, after a couple of years, it didn't look like we were going to do this. It looked like we were doing everything but the right thing. And all of a sudden, it started to come together. And this fella, Dick Boone, stuck with me, still with me. And that's been the biggest part of my career, is how my friends and car owners, C.J. Robertson, I only had a couple. Most of them, my family, Richard, Buddy, accomplished race car drivers in their own. My son Danny takes care of my business, my daughter, and of course my wife, who's always supported me, and my kids. Never could understand why, and I still don't. But the fellows that stayed with me for years, Ed Catozzi over here, he was with me with the Vega Wagon, Paulie Susie, J.C. I had Ronnie Williams, who's no longer with us, and I know he'd be here, and he'd be very proud to be here. All the guys I race with, I can't mention enough names because I know I'd leave somebody out, but someone like Leo Cleary, who was my idol when I was a kid. Believe it or not, Leo, I am a little younger, not much, but he was the person that took the time when I was a youngster, when I thought everybody was crashing me, and I guess I was doing most of it, to straighten me out. And I could never understand why he did it. And kind of a funny story I got is, I knew a fellow that he drove for, Bernie Burrows. His number 2 car at Norwood Arena, and Leo was a killer, as he was right to the last day he drove a race car. He gave me a body for a car, and I was just, wow, this has got to be the greatest thing that's ever happened. Well, I had no place to build a car, so I decided I'm going to build this thing on myself. So I cut this car in half, the body. I bring it in a couple, 3 pieces. I cut a chassis up, because it would only fit through the little garage door. Get this car all done, and my plan was to take the car apart. We'll put it together outside. Well, that didn't materialize because we had it painted, leaded, running, and a water meter man came down one day. I was down solo working on the car, and he looked around and said, I don't want to seem stupid or anything. He said, but, how the hell did you get that thing in here, or how are you going to get it out of here? And at that point in time, I didn't have that answer, but I knew I had to come up with something quick because the season was going to start. So I called on a friend of mine, Paul Susie, who's in the contractor business. He talked to his dad. Get your father down here, blow a hole in the back of my house, see if I can get my car out of here. His father looked at it and said, this man's out of his mind. He can't do this. This is a supporting wall in the house. And I goes, well, It's coming out one way or the other. So I'll go back to Dick Boone. We went down, we were partners in a rug business at gas station at the time. Young, not too bright. And we rented a couple of electric jackhammers. And a whole bunch of sledgehammers, which we broke a bunch of. And we must have spent, I'm gonna guess, I'd have to ask Dick, we must have spent 2 weeks drilling holes in the foundation and beating it out with a sledgehammer until we got the car so it could go out the door. We were all excited about this. We're finally letting this car out of the box. Right outside my garage, I read a picture of myself. There was a septic system there. We never really paid a lot of attention to this guy. Out the door I go. Needless to say, with all that extra time, you know, we really went over this car close, except for the brakes. I go out the door and I end on the septic system and took the top off it. So it was kind of a real smelly situation to get this car back in the garage again. And the neighbors were wondering what the hell this thing was that just grew out of the back of my house. And then there was the guys like Leo that got me on the straight line, got the car to work well, and we started very successful. And I asked Leo one day, why you help me? What's the game? He always he looks at me and he says, you know, I come up behind you, you're always going sideways, you're going the wrong way. He said, I don't want to think about passing you, I just want to go by you. He says, anytime you got to think about going by somebody, you're not going by. And he was so right. I learned so much from that man, words can't describe it. And I learned a lot from everybody. You know, I mean, Georgie Summers, one of the greatest guys I ever graced my life. Gentleman George, I'm not quite sure what that was all about. Maybe someday we can sit down and straighten that deal out. But other than that, all I can say is I couldn't be any more proud to have my name alongside all the people that was put in today and all the people that are here and on the Hall of Fame. I am just short for words, and I got to thank my wife. Thank you.
Making our next presentation is a Hall of Famer himself, a member of the class of 2002. And to show you how things come around in this sport, it's a circle, and things usually have a way of meeting. This man has also won 3 Ferraro 100s in a great career, one of the classiest people you will ever find involved in the sport of auto racing, Ray Miller.
The best way to get into the Hall of Fame is to have statistics like this next guy, Billy Simons. He's another guy who's got 40 years plus in the racing game. And his statistics include 10 track championships, 8 of those at Waterford Speedbowl. He had 2 at Riverside Park. He won both the modified and the sportsman title, same year, same driver at Waterford Speedbowl. That's the time when you could qualify. They'd have a sportsman race, and they would take the top 2 or 3 cars, put those in against the modifieds, and it wasn't uncommon for Billy's car to win the modified race also. So, pretty good statistics. 100 plus wins at tracks such as Plainville Stadium, Waterford Speedbowl, Riverside Park, Stafford Speedway, Monadnock. He also won on dirt at Lebanon Valley, Thompson, and his cars raced from Maine, Oxford, all the way down to New Smyrna, Florida, up and down the coast. Lots of races in those 40 years. Let me give you a list of his drivers. He had a lot of them. The first 4 you might not recognize, because I certainly don't, but he had Roy Peck, Babe Warner, Stan Spencer, and Squeaky Rogers. Now, I don't know how many of you out there besides Billy and his folks know those names. I don't know them, maybe you do. But let's get into the guys that really well-known, many of them Hall of Famers, and brought Billy a lot of wins in his years. Charlie Webster, Hank Stevens, Ray Delisle, Wild Bill Scrivener, Don Collins, Dickie Dunn, Gene Bergen, Bobby Santos, Ernie Gahan, Jerry Dostey, Jerry Pearl, Freddie Schultz, Bobby Turner from Maine, Leo Cleary, Eddie Flemke Sr., Bob Potter, Lenny Cleaves, Flying Brian Ross, Ronnie Wyckoff, S.J. Avancian, Daring Dick Castle, Dick brought Billy his first win at Stafford after he moved up from Waterford. Stan Greger brought Billy 2 track championships at Riverside Park. Merv Treichler, Mike Stefanik, Don DeRozier, George Kent, Rick Donnerly, Reggie Ruggiero, yours truly. I drove for Billy a total of 6 different seasons. Bob Polari drove for him. Mike McLaughlin drove for him at Riverside Park. John Rosati, Hall of Fame, drove for him. Marty Radwick, Ricky Summers, Doug Wilcott, Bruce D'Alessandro, and Dan Avery. Dan Avery ended his career with Billy at Monadnock Speedway. Let's talk a quick minute on where it all started, and it actually, the Simons excavator car started with Billy's brother Fred. He started in the late 40s, rented a car 3-4 years, got out of it, and Billy decided to take over, and he rented a car from early 50s right till 1993. Billy owned an excavating business. He took over from his dad, Clifford. He had a dozer, backhoe, dump truck. And one thing about Billy, his equipment, whether it be the race equipment or his construction equipment, a lot of times he didn't have the newest stuff with the construction equipment, but always top notch. I would visit Billy in the winter, always taking care of his equipment, his dozer, backhoe, always tip-top shape, and he used that same kind of approach with his racing. His cars broke down very little, and his construction equipment broke down very little. Driving for him for 6 seasons, I got a little story to tell. It's a story of a good time and a bad time. The bad time had nothing to do with Billy or his car. It had to do with the driver, and you're looking at him. It was 1985, hot summer night. We're going up to Riverside Park. We were going to Riverside for the season, and we went out for warm-ups. Now, I know many of you know how those steering wheels snap onto the steering shaft. They got to snap in place, and once they're there, but you better have them snapped on. Well, I go out for warm-ups, couple laps, come out of the second turn, the steering wheel is in my hand. We slapped the wall pretty good, tore up the front end, and you can imagine Billy wasn't too happy. I get on the hook, and they drag me into the pits. I'm still sitting in the car. Freddie was always with Billy. You could count on if you were at the track with Billy, you always saw Freddie there. Freddie comes over to me, he says, "What happened?" I says, "The wheel came off." He starts looking around the car. "Which wheel?" I says, "This one." That wasn't a good night. We loaded up, went home, and I could have got fired on the spot. Billy's a patient car owner, and we come back, we raced. 2 weeks later, they got the NASCAR Modified Tour had just started in 1985, and they were having an event at Waterford. Now, Waterford that's Billy's home track. He started down there. Everybody knew Billy Simons and the Simons 9 at Waterford. We're going to go down to Waterford. I wasn't a big fan of Waterford. I'd never done too much there, but that's where Billy won the race. I'd go for it. So we go down. From the time we unloaded that car, climbed in, I never drove a car that was more domineering. The car was just on rails. Mickey Mouse could have driven that car that night, but it was one of those nights, and everybody was there. It was the Modified Tour, Richie, Bugsy, George Kent, Brian Ross, you name it, they were all there, Modified Tour. Well, we qualified third in time trials, and I was no time trialer. We started off, and we just took off. Well, it just goes to say you can have a bad night in racing, and you can have a good night. And that night, Billy was just ecstatic, the crew was ecstatic, the fans loved it, the Simons 9 was back at Waterford in Winter Circle, but we did have one problem. Jerry Cook had just been promoted to tour director. He came over, he knew that was a Riverside car. There's no way a Riverside car is going to beat NASCAR Modified Tour at Waterford Speed Bowl. Don't touch that car. We're going to inspect it from front to back. Well, I went home. Well, they inspected, and they inspected more. And as always, Billy ran a legal car. They couldn't find a thing, and it was just a great way to finish a night after a bad win, and then 2 weeks later having that. And I felt so good for winning for myself, and extremely proud of winning for Billy. So that was a great night. So Billy, my honor, I'm tickled pink that you're in the Hall of Fame. You and Janet can get back in a couple of days to that warm weather. I know you're missing that already, although it hasn't been that warm down in Florida. But proud to welcome you to the Hall of Fame, and hope you come back up from time to time and see us.
And I want to thank the Hall of Fame for inducting me in there. And I'd like to thank all my sponsors and all my drivers and all my friends that helped me in the car and through. And I want to say special thanks to my brother, Fred, and also my nephew, Richard. Thank you.
I just have one question left for everybody. What did you think of the Hall of Fame class of 2010? Good night, everybody, from the Hall of Fame.